Unit 3 The Globalization of Communications, a Global Village. Structure. 3.0 Objectives. 3.1 Introduction. 3.2 A Global Village. 3.3 An Arduous Journey, just over 100 years ago. 3.4 The Story of Human Communication as a Day in Our Lives. 3.5 Communication and Social Change. 3.6 Language and the New Technologies. 3.7 Let us sum up. 3.8 Further reading. 3.9 Answers to check your progress. 3.0 Objectives. This unit will help you to understand the following points. The world is now a global village. There has been an acceleration in communications in the last 100 years. Changes in communication technologies have made globalization possible, and indeed inevitable, and every revolutionary change in communications technologies results in unprecedented social change. 3.1 Introduction. Have you ever thought what it would be like if you had lived 100 years ago? There would perhaps have been no electric light in your home or village or city. You would have used oil lamps. How would you travel? How would you get news of the world around you? How large would the world around you have been? What technology has done for us is to shrink our world. We travel by air rather than by bullock cart. We have the telephone, the radio, and television via satellite, allowing for instant communication across the globe. We have email and internet. A person who was magically transported from the early 20th century to the early 21st century would be puzzled and quite lost in our world. In this unit we shall think about the technology that has changed our world, and evaluate how it has done so. We shall see that in the past 150 years or so, technological changes have been much more rapid than at any time in the history of humankind. As our means of communication have changed, our communication needs have changed as well. We now need to communicate with people all across the world, whose language and culture may be quite different than our own. We can no longer remain locked within a society and culture that we know, or grew up in. We have to meet new ways of living and seeing, and think of how best to integrate our lives into this larger world. Today, after more than a century of electric technology, we have extended our central nervous system itself in a global embrace, abolishing both space and time as far as our planet is concerned. Marshall McLuhan, Understanding Media, 1964. 3.2 A Global Village. It was Marshall McLuhan who coined the term the global village. McLuhan, who died on the last day of 1980, on December 31st, has been called the most celebrated English teacher of the 20th century. This Canadian was a professor of English literature, but he was also a communications theorist and philosopher. What did he mean by the global village? McLuhan was referring to a communications explosion that was creating a wired world. Our world is now interconnected by the instantaneous flow of information between any 2 points on the globe, however distant or remote. Events in one part of the world can be experienced from other parts as they happen, in real time. So our world of experience has the immediacy of life in a village, except that our village is now the entire world. Stop for a moment and think. Have you ever watched a cricket match or a football game that was happening in some other part of the world, such as Australia, Germany, or the West Indies, live, that is, as it was happening, on television? Activity. Ask an older person in the house if they remember a time when they waited for the next day's newspaper to find out what had happened in a game abroad. Have you ever used a cell phone to speak to your friend or relative from another city, or from a train or an airport? Activity. Ask the older people in your family if they remember a time when telephone calls were expensive and difficult to make, and people sent telegrams to say that they had arrived safely, or to inform you about some urgent news, usually bad news. L. Check your progress 1. Who was Marshall McLuhan? Why did he say the world is now a global village? 3.3 An arduous journey, just over a communications. Global village 100 years ago. For many of you, it may be difficult to imagine a time when a letter took 3 weeks to travel from India to Britain by sea. Indeed, if we go back to the late 19th century, we find that 3 weeks 21 days were once required for a journey from Trichinopoly, now Tiruchirappalli or Tiruchai in Tamil Nadu, to Visakhapatnam, now Vishakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh. In 1892, the grandfather of the astrophysicist S. Chandrasekhar performed just such a journey. You may know that S. Chandrasekhar is the person who formulated the Chandrasekhar limit that led to the discovery of neutron stars and black holes. Chandrasekhar's uncle was Sir C.V. Raman. Chandrasekhar's biographer, Kameshvar Kavali, tells us, they first had to go out of their way to Guntakal in order to take the train to Biswada, Vijayawada, then they traveled by construction train and canal boats to Rajmundry. Finally they rode for 4 days in a cart pulled by bullocks to reach their destination. Kameshvar Kavali, 1990:42. He then tells us, at that time the railroads were just being built. The very next year, Chandra's father could join them in 1 day. So you see how dramatically the railways have altered our world, although today we think of a journey by train as a slow way of traveling. Active. Find Timji, Guntakal, Vijayawada, Rajamundry, and Vijayakhapatnam on a map of India. Find out the distances between these places. Look for a road map, Anglo Rail map of India. Find out how these places are now connected. What route would you now take to 20 from Tidukka to Vizag? Is it possible to take a plane now from Tiruchai to Vizag? How long would a plane journey, a journey high road, and a journey by train take? Plan a journey from Tiruchai to Vidi, keeping in mind the tina as well as the money you can afford to spend. Check your progress 2. How long did it take to travel from Tiruchai, Tamil Nadu, to Vijayawada, Andhra Pradesh, in 1892? And why? 3.4 The story of human communication as a day in our lives. The communication facilities that we take for granted today actually represent a very recent achievement in the history of humankind. Just how recent they are is dramatically described by Frederick Williams in an essay, The 360 Century Pay. Let us suppose that the cultural history of human beings begins around 360 centuries ago. Biologically, of course, human beings or Homo sapiens are thought to have evolved much earlier, about 200,000 years ago, spreading out of Africa 100,000 years ago. But from around 34,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE, we find Homo sapiens making the cave paintings found in France, Italy, and Spain, and in parts of India such as Bhimpetka near Bhopal. Note, BCE equals before the Christian era, CE equals Christian era. The author of the cave paintings was Cro-Magnon man of the Paleolithic period. These were Stone Age people, cave dwellers, and tool makers, and it has been conventional in Western thought to begin the cultural history of humankind with the Cro-Magnon human, going back 360 centuries. Let us take these 360 centuries of our cultural existence, then, and map them onto 1 day of 24 hours. Let us pretend that 360 centuries can be seen as a single day in the existence of human beings. We would thus get a day in the history and evolution of communication among humans. What does this day look like? We begin our day at midnight, as is the convention, 00 hours. Imagine that the first human baby was born at midnight. From the beginning, at midnight, we have language, in the form of speech. We also have pictures, as we have already mentioned the cave paintings of Stone Age people, drawn and used perhaps for magic rituals, for protection, and good luck during the hunt. But we do not yet have writing. The origin of writing is commonly taken to be around a mere 5,000 years ago. So the journey from speech to writing takes 31,000 years or 310 centuries, from 360 centuries ago to 50 centuries ago. In terms of our communications day of 24 hours, it takes 20 hours and 40 minutes. The first human baby is now 20 hours and 40 minutes old, and it is late evening on the first day of its life. New Dav. 1 midnight. Homo sapiens, language, speaking. BCE. 8:00. Cave paintings. 1-2 o'clock noon. Nothing. 6:00 p.m. Nothing. p.m. Sunenans, writing, 4000 BCE. Check your progress. -3. What communication tool did we have at Lilith a day in our communication history? How long ago did Hunan beings learn to capture speech as writing? Did they draw pictures much before they learned to write? How do we know? Where can you see the cave paintings of early human beings? What do BCE and CE stand for? I table adapted from Williams 1982:25. What is the next great leap forward in communications? Let us say, printing. This happens in 600 CE in China, but in 1453 CE in the Western world, with the Gutenberg Bible. Now let's look at our clock. It is already nearing midnight again. It's 11:38 p.m. The telegraph appears at 11:53 p.m. in the year 1855 CE, and for the first time, as McLuhan points out, a message can travel faster than the messenger. And then, the last 5 minutes of the day explode with new communications technologies. We are on an acceleration curve of communications inventions. The telephone. 1876 CE. Commercial radio. 1900 CE. Sound motion pictures. 1912 CE. Prototype electronic computer. 1942 CE. Xerography. 1946 CE. Color television. 1951 CE. First commercial satellite. 1962 CE. Williams makes the point that the greatest growth in communications technologies has been in our lifetimes, and it is still accelerating. This is in remarkable contrast to the approximately 180 lifetimes which separate the invention of writing from the invention of printing in our communications history. Frederick Williams was writing in 1982, so many of the technologies that have evolved during your own lifetime are not mentioned by him. Notice that he does not mention the personal computer, the laptop, and the palm top, the internet, or the cell phone. His list of inventions perhaps looks old to you already. So let's do the following activity. 8:0. Check your progress for. Livid arrange the co-NN itinecation letten 0102 IES in their order appearance. Radio, print W/the/television, IHE scroll /. Add our technologies to this list. Try to find UT the dates of their first appearance. Do say that there has been a Conan Unicalions explosion Hundical or Q. Hat does it north-northeast and to say that the of the telt adipl, lore first till the could faster han file hint, think oi messages were sent inv the king's anthology. Were the always Hunvan? LL. Williams says writing and printing were separated by about 18 lifetimes. How many years is each lifetime, on this account? 11 years separate the invention of printing in the Western world, and the invention of writing. 3.5 Communication and social change. Communication theorists maintain that periods of human social change correlate with changes in communications technologies. The human being and his brain have remained essentially the same for unimaginable stretches of time, because biological change is evolutionary change, which takes place over millions of years. But changes in communications, we have seen, can occur very rapidly, within a single lifetime. Such communication changes have brought about social changes that seem to fundamentally alter the kinds of learning that our brains must adapt to. They also alter our perceptions of nation, society, family, and values. Can you think why this would happen? Let's take one example. The invention of printing made possible a transition from oral to literate societies. Before printing, most people were illiterate. It wasn't expected that everyone should be able to read and write, because the materials for reading and writing were not available cheaply and plentifully. Books were handwritten and illustrated by hand, and very precious because there were no cheap copies. It was printing that made the idea of universal literacy feasible. It was printing that led to the expectation that every human being should be able to read and write, and attend school. Earlier, when the transmission of knowledge was oral, the idea of distance education was unimaginable. Both teacher and taught had to be physically present, and each teacher had only a few pupils. Knowledge was imparted through interaction between teacher and taught, and perhaps this is what gave rise to the Guru Shishya Parampara, or the Socratic mode of education through dialogue. Today we can return to oral education and combine it with distance education, because of the availability of media that carry the spoken word across distances, the radio and television. When education, and communication, was primarily oral, there was a great emphasis on memory, and speech skills. Memory was the technology that preserved information and passed it on from generation to generation, in the absence of books, and audio or video cassettes, CDs, and DVDs. Both a grammar of Sanskrit, by Panini, and a dictionary of Sanskrit, the Amarikosha, have been preserved in this way for generations by memorization, for example. This is why it was important to memorize things accurately. Speech was the medium through which information was passed on, so it was important to recite what you knew clearly and exactly. The importance of memorization in education has steadily decreased, as we depend increasingly on books and reference documents, and calculators, and cell phones, to store information such as facts and figures, or phone numbers and addresses, or to perform simple arithmetical calculations. The idea is that in this way we can use our mental energy in more creative ways. Certainly, the kind of globalization that we are witnessing today would not be possible without the electronic communication technologies that have been discovered just in the last half-century or so. Imagine that you lived over 100 years ago, before the invention of the aeroplane, in a time when telephones were still few and far between, and not very efficient. If you sailed away, as some of our countrymen and women did, to a country in the South Pacific, or Africa, or Southeast Asia, you would soon lose touch with the world and the people you had left behind. Today, however, we have people on different continents who keep in touch by chatting on the internet, which is equipped with a webcam or camera, and these people form virtual communities. These virtual communities exist for not only personal or familial reasons, a son or daughter keeping in touch with parents, spouses keeping in touch with each other, but also for business reasons, as you are perhaps well aware. The information technology industry has opened up an entire new line of work in our times, made possible by the instantaneous communication links between continents via computer and satellite. David Graddall tells us, in The Future of English, page 31, cost has been, traditionally, a major barrier to long-distance calls. But the cost of communication has lowered dramatically. The first transatlantic telephone cable, laid in 1956, allowed 36 simultaneous conversations. The latest undersea fiber optic link is capable of carrying 600,000. Telecommunications technology has therefore moved towards a communication network in the shape of the Internet, where a personal computer connects directly with another personal computer, instead of going through a hierarchy of gatekeepers. Older people may remember a time when all telephone calls were mediated by an operator, and for a long-distance call, whether national or international, you would talk first to the local operator, who would speak with the operator at the destination, who would speak with the person you wished to talk with, so there were two mediators between you and the person you called. Today you can just dial the number and speak on. Graddall continues, this shift towards a communication network rather than a hierarchy allows dispersed discourse communities to emerge, based on shared interests such as hobbies, gardening, exotic fish, criminality, terrorism, pornography, or support, ulcerative colitis sufferers, parents of children with Down syndrome. Diasporic cultural and linguistic groups can share concerns, ideas, and decision-making as never before. The word diaspora means a spreading of people, from a nation or a culture. Diasporic is its adjectival form. We often hear of the diaspora of Indians in Britain, Fiji, etc., who form a market for Hindi films. With the Internet, there can be communities that are spread out, but linked by a specific common interest, such as a language or a hobby. These diasporic communities are also sometimes called virtual communities, that exist in a virtual reality created by the Internet. Check your progress 5. 12. Fill in the blanks. When education was there was a great emphasis on memory and speech skills. Memory was the that preserved information and passed it on from generation to generation, in the absence of books, and audio or video cassettes, CDs, and DVDs. Both of Sanskrit, by Panini, and of Sanskrit, the Amara Kosha, have been preserved in this way for generation. S by memorization. D. E. H. The importance of in educa, I on eva.s stedilv as 6e depend on books on e.l redo n.s. AVE can use are more. \v hen nalde oral. The idea to inable. In Ada transition, Raleigh oral to print into that made the idea of. Ilalavi can combine education and distance because that curry the spoken word across distances, the. Keep a diary ola dav in your light. Noting down the corn illit nakashan, logis I, vat the use. U. Use, ir tesim nalk, 2 ies ruin, ionete in this as a guide, also add Vour 1021 es to this list. Tin Sun Leon or Escumul people in Vour is or ace mode, van 6, years old. Ask of these techno Louisel he _v and Heather Sheffield, L at East or difficult use Thean. What do think about these? Kale think qt heek isi in achine. 3.6 Language and the new technologies. Coming to writing, Today the short messaging service or SMS is reshaping written English, because of the time and space requirements imposed by this medium, in ways that some of us find strange. But we should remember that the medium has always shaped the message. Writing systems have arisen in response to the needs of communication, on the one hand, and of the materials available for writing, on the other. Thus we find parallels to the SMS strategies in the story of writing, of how writing began and changed to the system we know today. Early writing systems had a primitive writing technology, the material on which they wrote, and the stylus with which they wrote. So it was important to them that the written message be brief and economical, just as it is to the SMS message writer today. The Semitic languages left out vowels in their writing, because these were predictable from the context. We now find SMS messages doing the same. PIs for please, BK for back, SND for send, are examples where the vowel sound has been left out, PIs SND BK imply. Before the invention of the alphabet, which assigns sounds to symbols uniquely, that is, there is approximately one spelling for each sound, there was a stage of writing called rebus writing. Rebus writing made use of homophony in language, that is, words that sound similar but mean different things. For example, sun and sun in English, also not, be and be, and so on. The Sumerians, who invented writing, used the symbol of an arrow, the word for which was pronounced ti, to denote a word ti with the same sound but a very different meaning. As we can now see, the use of 2 for 2, or before for before, is a kind of rebus writing. So the SMS messenger of today is actually falling back on strategies for making a message short and easy to write that were used by her forebears, the inventors of writing, some millennia earlier. Indeed, linguists say each generation reinvents language, although adults think children imitate or copy them. Check your progress 6. Pick out the IGNOU nerns, words which sound alike are air, road, which, here, hodlv.ich, air, here, road. Can you read these? Bread and butler fr year eyes nlyhppy birthday wash and wear. 3.7 Let us sum up. Our world is now connected by the instantaneous flow of information between any 2 points. So our world of experience has the immediacy of life in a village, a global village. The railways similarly altered our world a century ago, although today we think of a journey by train as a slow way of traveling. The communication facilities that we take for granted are actually a very recent achievement in the history of humankind. If we take the 360 centuries of our cultural existence as a 360-century day, at the beginning, at midnight, we have language, in the form of speech. We also have pictures, the cave paintings of Stone Age people. But we do not yet have writing. The origin of writing is commonly taken to be around a mere 5,000 years ago. So the journey from speech to writing takes 31,000 years or 310 centuries. The next great leap forward in communications is printing, in 600 CE in China, but in 1453 CE in the Western world. Our clock is nearing midnight again. The last 5 minutes of the day explode with new communications technologies. We are on an acceleration curve of communications inventions. The greatest growth in communications technologies has been in our lifetimes, and it is still accelerating. Periods of human social change correlate with changes in communications technologies. The invention of printing made possible a transition from oral to literate societies. It made the idea of universal literacy feasible. When education and communication were primarily oral, there was a great emphasis on memory and speech skills. Memory was the technology that preserved information and passed it on from generation to generation. The importance of memorization in education has steadily decreased, as we depend increasingly on books and reference documents, and calculators. The globalization we are witnessing today is possible because of the electronic communication technologies discovered just during the last half-century. Dispersed discourse communities have emerged that communicate through their computers, based on shared interests such as hobbies or support. These communities are sometimes called virtual communities, that exist in a virtual reality created by the Internet. Today the short messaging service or SMS is reshaping written English. But we find parallels to the SMS strategies in the story of writing. Early writing systems had a primitive writing technology, so it was important for the message to be brief and economical, just as it is to the SMS message writer today. So the SMS messenger of today is actually using strategies to write that were used by the inventors of writing, some millennia earlier.